So again, thanks Tanya for joining us today as part of our ASAA oral history project. You're one of the people that we really wanted to talk to learn more about you and your life in Asian studies and sort of by extension also in the ASAA.
Thank you
So
very much for having me. I'm really thrilled that you asked me. Yeah, it's very kind.
thank you for agreeing to join us anyway. Anyway, so Tash and I are going to been working on this together. We're going to sort of ask you a few questions. We've divided them up, and yeah, hopefully, sort of just a way to learn a bit more about you and your work. So, Tanya, I suppose could you start off by telling us your origin story, as it were, in Asian studies? You know, so when, how, and where did it begin?
Okay. Well, I think it actually began in Bolivia, if I'm honest. So
Okay.
I traveled to, in particular, India, but also Sri Lanka and Nepal um, earlier in my life. And then I decided to go to South America and do a big trip through South America. So I was one of these people who did a lot of backpacking in my early 20s. And when I was in Bolivia, found myself walking into a travel agent to try to buy a one-way ticket to India. So, and I love Bolivia. Bolivia is an amazing country, but there was something that India had kind of gotten under my skin at that particular point, and there was something really compelling about it that I wanted to spend more time there. And it came at a pretty pivotal time, I guess, because I was just about to start university. I started as a mature age student at age 25, and I had to decide what major I should do. And I was going to choose international studies, and I decided to do Asian studies instead and to major in Hindi. And then, yeah, once you learn a language, it's
Right.
like it's a bigger commitment than a marriage. I'd say it's like you're locked in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great story. I had no idea about that. But a wonderful story. I was going to then ask you whether there was a particular book or film or encounter that also sort of helped you become that. But I guess in a way, maybe you've answered that in terms of your happenstance visit to that travel agent. But were there any other things or any other factors that sort of pushed you, do you think, in that direction? Or
No, I think it was just the travel. And but I remember when I was growing up, before I started to travel, so in the early 90s, and this was a time of Paul Keating and Asian studies was very present, and Australia was looking outward towards Asia, and I certainly picked up on that. The first time I went to India was due to a kind of political stance on Tibet, and so I wanted to go to Dharamshala, and so I went there with my grandmother to begin with. So no, I would say that there was not a book, there wasn't a movie. It was more direct experience that kind of led me, yeah, that direction.
yeah. And so that visit you made with your grandmother, this is before university, you're saying, and everything. So
Yes.
when did you do that? How old were you then?
So I think I was 21. So it was, oh yeah, 21, 1997. Oh, I shouldn't say that. I've just given my age away. Oh, that's terrible. Yeah, 2007 or something. I don't know.
So, some undefined point in the past, anyway, not too far back
Exactly.
here. So, thank you very much. All right, and so now, we'll ask you. So what? And overall, how would you describe your main fields of research in terms of Asian studies, and what's been one of your favourite or what do you think is one of the best sort of books or articles or other publications that really captures that work
Of my own publications
of
or
yours? Yeah, of yours.
okay.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess in terms of my expertise, it was very much based on a deep understanding of development in India. So my degree was development studies and Asian studies. My PhD was in development studies. And so I spent a lot of time in India getting to know the development scene very well. I then started to do research in Indonesia for very complicated reasons, which I can go into, but that was an opportunity that arose during my postdoc at CSIRO. And I started to do comparative ethnographic work is how I would describe it. So again, getting to know the Indonesian development sector, and seeing what was unusual in Indonesia compared to India, seeing what had been very familiar to me in India being shown in a new light through Indonesia, as well as having that curiosity reinvigorated by going to a different country context. So that's kind of where I started to move into the comparative ethnography kind of methodology, I guess, if you like. This is a very long-winded response to your question. I was just thinking through it logically. So that was, I guess, how I would define my expertise is trying to look in depth across different contexts in Asia to answer some of the bigger universal questions that we have. So currently that is looking at women in politics. In the past, it was looking at development and the relationships within development. So if I was to select one book, I would say probably the book Sustainability in Development. I can't remember the subtitle. Isn't that terrible? It's about urban community development. But what I did was did ethnographic work in both India and Indonesia, or more specifically in Dehradun and in Medan, and try to and use those experiences to try to re-theorize how power works in development contexts. And that's kind of the way that my research has progressed now. So now I'm doing something similar, same two cities, Dehradun, Medan, trying to understand how power works in the field of politics and how it intersects with gender.
Yeah, great. Before I pass to Tash for a while, one last thing from me. That could you tell us a little bit more about uh, how long you have spent in both of those countries, both India and Indonesia, over the years? Because it's if it's got to the point where you're conversant in India, I mean that's a very big achievement, it would seem. So it's suggesting quite a lot of immersion there. So could you just tell us a bit about that, please, Tanya?
Yeah, I'm just trying to. This again will be a very long-winded answer,
That's all
I'm
right.
afraid. So I first went to India in 1997, and but I just travelled there until I had an internship. So I did my undergraduate at the Australian National University at the ANU, where I now work, and I had an internship in 2003, and I also did intensive Hindi courses during my ANU undergraduate degree, and I did a specialist year in India degree. I then did my PhD fieldwork in India, so this is a year there and another year on top of that, and then a postdoc in Telangana, actually, so in South India. And then, yeah, I mean, I've been back and forth so many times. I also had a DECRA project, so that required, maybe about 8 months of fieldwork all up in Dehradun. And my future fellowship has been a lesser period of time, maybe about 5 months in India for my future fellowship. I also, have relatives, I guess, through marriage in India, so I go back and forth for that reason as well. In Indonesia, it's a little bit more recent. So it started with my postdoc, as I mentioned earlier, in central Lombok, and that was 4 months, I believe, and then about 10 months during my DECRA, and it's been about 6 months, I think, during my future fellowship, plus trips in between. So, got a bit of funding here to do a small project, or, there was an opportunity to do a bit of, collaboration building or what have you. Yeah, so I can't really quantify it. I don't know if that even answers your question, but that's kind of, I've kind of lost count, but I'm sure most people have.
No. You've given us a really good flavour, I think, and that's good to know. Tash, did you have any questions you wanted to ask just off what we've talked about so far, or do you just want to move to a few different things for Tanya? So,
Yeah, well, I mostly just add it's really incredible to see this kind of such a sustained engagement kind of in the field that you've been working in, and something that very much is like the next generation, I feel that like really aspire to that really rich engagement in the region. I guess I'm kind of
Oh,
wondering,
actually,
yeah.
do you mind if, Tash, before we move on, because I do also want to qualify that as well, because, I think, I've been really fortunate to have opportunities that have allowed me to have, to be able to spend, 18 months of field work, during over 4 years. And that's something that's pretty difficult to get. And so I don't think it's always, um, possible. I just want to say that I've been very fortunate in that regard, but I would also say that it comes with costs. So being across India and Indonesia does definitely make me a little bit more shallow in both. I would say, if I compare myself to an Indonesianist or somebody who's been working in India for a very long time, and only in India, they're just able to keep on top of what's happening a lot better. They can read the newspapers every day. I struggle to keep up. My language comes and goes. It's hard moving across, Bahasa and Hindi sometimes. So, I wouldn't say that it's the ideal, but I think it's worked for me in terms of being really curious and always wanting to do something new. But it's not always the most ideal academic journey, if you like, but a privileged one, like a lucky one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting to hear. And perhaps we'll talk a bit more about kind of the opportunities to spend time in the field when we think a bit about the state of Asian studies in Australia at the moment.
Mm.
But I guess on that, the question that I'm thinking about is in your current role at the ANU, like how does Asia and Asian studies feature in your role? Do you teach into it? Do you research still predominantly consider yourself as in Asian studies, or are you researching in Australia as well?
Yeah, so I am doing research in Australia as well. So I started, my large project, the Future Fellowship, in 2020, which should, indicate one of the reasons, COVID had just started. I was actually in Indonesia when Maurice Payne told us all to get on flights to go home. So then I started to do some research on women in Australian politics. And I have to admit that I've really enjoyed that. Like, it's been a lot of fun, and it's been great to be for the field to be so proximate and accessible. So, but I do still consider myself very much an Asianist. But I see my role as shifting slightly. So, this is probably best, I guess, exemplified through the workshop that we held a couple of years ago, which was looking at gender and politics across Asia and Oceania. And it was really there to foreground the scholarship that's coming out of the region, as well as the scholarship that's happening at the ANU, because the ANU is particularly strong in Asian studies and Pacific studies. And I do see, that my role, not role is the wrong way to put it, but the way that it works for me now, especially, now that I'm coming into a higher teaching and administrative load, is to not do the research myself in Indonesia or in India, but work with really great partners and build scholarship together, and to foreground, their research and their expertise in the region, and for me to just learn from what they're doing and what we're doing together, but also in ways that can speak comparatively across a number of contexts. I don't know if that quite made sense, but that's, yeah, it comes out a lot clearer in my head.
Made total sense. It's great.
Yeah, but do I teach? I'm not teaching at the moment, but I did teach into Asian Studies first year, and I still, very much enjoy teaching Asian Studies. Yeah, and look forward to teaching it again soon.
Yeah. Brilliant. David, back to you.
Um, yeah, I just sort of wanted to pick up on the point you raised too about the two countries, Tanya, because like it's not like you pick two small countries or two big players. India and Indonesia are both very, worlds unto themselves, really. So you've to even attempt to sort of to make sense of them and to do so, I think the work you've done is so respected and acknowledged. It's not, you've clearly, that shouldn't be underplayed. I think your achievement there, but it's great to have you in that role. Uh, and do you find, well, just to probably pick up on Tasha's question, are you getting so some of those scholars who you work with in Indonesia and India, are some of their students perhaps also coming through and to study with you at the ANU? Are they able to, you able to bring them out here?
Oh, look, we've tried it. I have a very dear, friend who I've been working with for a long, long time, and unfortunately, IELTS is a bit of a barrier. So that's just, and that's the case for another colleague as well, although she's now completed her PhD in Malaysia, and is working at BRIN, which is great. So, I've definitely seen, their careers evolve just as my career has evolved over time, and that's been fantastic. I don't work with a huge breadth of people, but I work with the same people again and again over a period of time. I'm actually scared of what will happen when we all kind of part ways, but yeah, that's worked at the moment, but yeah. And in India, I work with an NGO, so it's been quite different. I've more recently been starting to work with a couple of PhD students, not PhD students, sorry, graduates in Delhi, and they both have PhD aspirations, but we're very early into our relationship, and so hopefully that will develop over time once we get some articles and things written together.
Great. Thank you. I had another question, or just we'd like to sort of get you to talk a little bit about what involvement you've had institutionally through the ASAA and its various bits and pieces. So what I know a little bit of that story, but perhaps you could tell us all about your various involvements.
Well, I think I have to credit Professor Michelle Ford actually, for first getting me into ASA. Probably much, I'm sure lots of people have origin stories which are similar in that respect. So I was at the ASA conference here at the ANU, which was a great conference back in 2016 or 17, I believe. Oh, 16, and Michelle was organising the 2018 conference at UCID. And she brought me onto the organising committee, which was a huge amount of fun. And that was a highly successful conference under her leadership. That kind of got me into thinking about being a little bit more proactive in ASA. I have always found the Asian Studies Association of Australia, the colleagues are, I mean, it's just such a collegial and friendly environment. So it's always been a joyful part of one's work to be working with them. So I guess the other things that I've done along the way is to work with Melissa Crouch and Louise Edwards on the Women in Asia conference that we hosted at UNSW back in 2019, maybe it was. And then, of course, as the South Asia editor for Asian Studies Review under your leadership, David, for a few years. And then I was also secretary for the South Asian Studies Association of Australia for a number of years as well. Yeah, with Priya Chako, who's fabulous.
And I understand that you've also, or maybe until recently, you were the president of the Development Studies Association. So is that right? So you've sort of you do have your you cast yourself a little widely, but so how does that feature? So how does that feature in your life as opposed to the various parts of Asian studies, would you say?
Yeah, like I actually think there's a really close alignment to development studies and Asian studies. So I don't remember if Tash remembers, but I always used to drum into the development studies students that we had at UNSW that it's really good if you can try to get some kind of regional expertise. It just helps you, if you understand the context in a country in depth in terms of development, that's very, very beneficial, as well as having language skills, obviously are a great help as well. So I see development studies in Australia in particular to be quite focused on Asia and Oceania. So I think there's a really close alignment there. I have actually stayed more in Asian studies than I have in development studies. So, more recently I've been working in gender and politics, and I'm kind of hanging out with those people more so than the development studies people, which is a shame because the development studies community in Australia is fabulous. And there was a group of us who put together that association. I was the first president actually, only for a couple of years, and so it's that was busy, but really satisfying and rewarding, as I'm sure you know as well. It's great to be
Yeah.
involved.
And are there any other sort of conferences or meetings that you find yourself either regularly or semi-regularly attending? I'm just sort of wondering, like APSA, for instance, the Political Studies Association. Any of those sort of feature in your life, or is it just a little bit one thing too many?
I've been going to a couple of anthropology conferences, obviously. Yep, and also going to some politics and gender conferences, which is quite a niche area, but they've been a lot of fun as well. Then there's the kind of the Indonesian Council Open Conference, for example, that's coming up in July, which of course is also Asian Studies, but that's I guess they're the kind of people I hang out with at the moment. I did go to a development studies conference in the UK last year, and I have to admit it wasn't like I didn't go to too many panels. I just wandered the streets of London.
there are worse things to be doing. No,
Yeah.
thank you, Tanya, for those answers. I'm going to pass back to Tash now. She's got a few more things to ask as well.
Incredible. That's been so fun to hear about. You must be a very, very busy person between all of those groups of people you spend time with. I guess coming back to the earlier part of the conversation we had about the state of Asian studies in Australia, this is a field that has undergone a lot of change over the years, and I thought we would invite you to reflect a bit on how you assess the position of Asian studies in Australia now and how you see that the field has changed over time.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people will talk about the decline in numbers of students who are coming through learning languages. I think I mean, that's a particular concern that we have in the School of Culture, History and Languages, obviously, where I am now. I'm sure other people can speak to that with much more authority, and information than I do. I guess for me, one of I guess the challenges that we have is that a lot of the government agencies that used to prioritise specialist knowledge in the region, such as DFAT, for example, in Australia, DFID in the UK, they've gone to being much more generalist. So, their regional knowledge, as far as I can understand, is not so prioritised. And of course, that has an impact in terms of the people who come through to our programs. Yeah, and now, so in terms of teaching, I think that's a bit of a problem. I mean, it's also a problem, I think, within those agencies. As I said, I think that people working in development in particular should have some regional expertise. I see it as non-negotiable. So they do draw upon our expertise a lot more as well in that regard. In terms of scholarship, I would sort of go back to some of the earlier things that I was talking about in terms of, I remember when I used to go to the Indonesia update. I love the Indonesia update. It's like a big cheat sheet for someone like me because all these experts in the same room. It's really fantastic. And I think they used to be much more populated by scholars from Australia. And now you can see that they're bringing in many more scholars from the region, or from Indonesia, I should say. And I think that's something to be encouraged. I think, we're no longer thinking of ourselves as being the experts who are talking about Asia. We're kind of working with people in the region to produce knowledge together and to also showcase their, well, at least in relation to me, they're much greater expertise than what we have. So that's, I think, also a shift. And I think that's also responding to, for example, going, to looking at Indonesia, the government of Indonesia is also prioritizing, when we have collaborations that, their scholars are lead authors. And, I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more in terms of, how we collaborate. What else has changed? I have very short notes that I wrote. Yeah, no, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, yeah, it's really interesting to hear a lot of, the way that people in Australia are responding to kind of these changes. I guess on the flip side of the challenges then is like the topics or subfields that are emergent. And so I guess the question is like, what are the topics or subfields that are personally exciting to you at the moment?
Yeah, I, I did think about this for, I don't know, I might have given it a couple of minutes when when I was running through the questions before this conversation. I couldn't really think of any that really stood out that are not just, directly related to my research area. I mean, I do think what I find really exciting is comparing political cultures and electoral cultures across different countries. So, again, that kind of deep political ethnographic work that seeks to understand politics not through its institutions and not through any kind of normative frame or any relational frame to institutions in the West, but on their own terms, their kind of vernacular features, but also the way that they're deeply embedded in the socio-cultural context. So for me, that's really exciting, and doing that across different countries and seeing what we learn from that exercise is, for me, the most exciting thing that's happening at the moment.
I just sort of build on Tasha's question there, but so put differently, I suppose, and you've sort of gone partway to answering it. If you could clone Tanya Jakimow, what would 5 Tanyas be doing right now? Like if you only had if you had 5 times as much capacity on your hands.
Sleeping.
One of them would be sleeping, right?
One of them would be sleeping full time. Oh yeah, no, that's such a great question. I think I would send one off on building relationships across the region. So, so that we can have these conversations and dialogues across, holding more workshops and having these thematic, these themes that we explore together. I think that one Tanya would be doing that. Another Tanya would be just strictly embedded exactly where I want to be embedded, and another one in Medan, so that I'm getting, all of that really deep, rich ethnographic knowledge. I think there's a lot to do on urban spaces as well, so I'd probably, send one off in that direction. Also, I'm not quite answering this right. Um, but I think there would also be another one who was they're thinking more deeply about what that research in Asia means in terms of understanding Australia. So, probably, that deep thinking that is required for that conversation, for that question, but also those conversations that happen, with for example, the Asian Australian Research Network, and thinking through, that would be another area.
Just on that, can I ask you, I mean, you did say parenthetically that you've been, as part of your future fellowship, you've been, I suppose, looking at women in like regional Australia, is that right? Sort of, and you've obviously done somewhat related uh, work in Indonesia and India. Is there a way to bring those bodies of work into conversations with each other? I think you might have mentioned one workshop and one project you've done, but can you see, are there more sort of pathways there that you might pursue if time and circumstance allow?
I think this would be my favorite project, actually. If I was able to do one. Yeah, I think there are two ways that it's directly relevant. The first is thinking. So, I do look at women in local government in New South Wales in both metro and regional areas, and women are very easy to count. So it's very easy to identify subject areas around. Okay, so we need to look at gender in politics, but actually, when we look at the patterns of under and over representation, it's the European Anglo Australians who are overrepresented, and Asian Australians, especially Asian Australian women, tend to be underrepresented. And I don't want to say that, Asians, I think there's a bit of a danger in saying that studies of Asia help us to understand the diaspora in Australia, because that's kind of a form of, saying that they're distinct from, the Australian, Australia more writ large. But but I do think that we need to understand this Australia better by understanding, Asia, and again, the kind of political cultures that come through Asia. So I guess what I'm getting at is, for example, when I look at my research in India and I look at the, very strong engagement of women in local politics in India, the party structures that they have, the kind of forms of familiarity, the practices that they have. And I wonder, what we can learn from that kind of political culture in terms of understanding the engagement of women who have more recently migrated from India into Australia, how they're engaging in politics, and how, we can increase their participation in local government, if you like. So I guess that's sort of one way. The other way is, probably the more direct way, which is, a lot of my theory development has been in India, and then looking and comparing and seeing what's of more generalizable lessons, what's more specific when I compare India and Indonesia. And from that, developing theoretical frames, which are absolutely relevant to the Australian political context as well. So that's, not doing studies of Asia, if you like, but rather seeing Asia as a place where we can develop theory, and that theory being able to be applied or used as a lens to develop insights into Australia or anywhere else. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's so wonderful. I especially really enjoyed picking up on this idea of like, where do we place diaspora in this thing that we call Asian studies in Australia? And that's definitely something that I'm pursuing in my own research too.
Yeah, there's the conference at the end of May, the Australian Asians Research Network, which I'm really looking forward to. I mean, I don't do research in that space, and I think, in terms of the legitimacy of me doing so, there's questions around that. But I think it's super useful to see what conversations are happening there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it sounds like it'll be a great conference. I guess we just have one last question for you. Although I should add, I really want to live in that world where 5 Tanyas are engaged in all of that different research. It sounds brilliant to me. But the
Oh, I
question
would
is,
also have one doing swimming pools. I'm sorry, that's my big project that I want to do, a project on swimming pools. But anyway, that's a
oh, love it.
diversion.
The question is this, what are some things that you think that Asianists, either collectively or individually, could be doing now to better prepare ourselves for the future?
Yeah, so big question. I think some of it is just doing what we do well and continuing to do that. So I mentioned the collegiality amongst colleagues and amongst scholars and students and all the rest of it in this community. So I really like that, and I think that's it's whenever PhD students are talking to me about who should or honors students, who should I be engaging with? I always send them along to ASAA things because I know everybody's going to be nice and welcoming and encouraging, and I think that's important to continue to build the community. I know that there are a community of scholars which I have or others have withdrawn just because they've had negative experiences. So I think that's something that we shouldn't take for granted. Obviously, there's a lot of advocacy that has to go on in terms of explaining the value of Asian studies, and I would say that's conversations to have with DFAT and government agencies as well, so that they can understand why regional expertise is important. And then there's another one which I have forgotten. Oh, let me see. Oh yeah, and the other one is thinking. I don't know if this is the right term, but this is a term that I've heard circulating in our school. Is engaging with heritage students. So a lot of my work actually on local councils is in Western Sydney, where there's a lot of people who are first generation born in Australia to parents in South Asia or East Asia or Southeast Asia. And they're born with this kind of curiosity and also familiarity with the region. And I think that's something to really harness to bring into our programs and to again kind of build the curiosity and excitement about Asia in Australia.
Can I ask just on the back of that? I mean, what about this perennial issue of language and language
Mm.
study? Is there it's sort of it's a bit implicit, I think, in the second point you made about engaging with about advocacy and talking to stakeholders in government. Do you have a suggestion about, I don't know, I suppose the necessity of whether it is absolute necessity to have that language as part of an Asian studies program, but also what we can do in a constrained resource environment?
Yeah, no, I do think it's necessary that we continue to have languages in our Asian studies offerings. And I do think it's important that we have, I mean, I'm not, the flag bearer for the ANU, but it is important that we have languages taught in Australia, even if we do have low student numbers. So how to resource that is a really big question. In terms of growing the student base, I do think the heritage students, when I go through Western Sydney and I see all of these schools teaching Tamil, for example. Now, Tamil, to my knowledge, we don't teach that anywhere in Australia, in an Australian university. But obviously, if we can, start, responding to that demand, if you like, and tapping into those communities and saying, this is what a university degree in a language can bring you. I think that would be useful. So yeah, engaging with local communities, and by that I mean like local government areas. Um, yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's no easy answers, right? I mean, obviously it has to be promoted in high schools, but I know that there's a shortage of teachers in high schools. But how we get people through, yeah, no, see, I think I said right at the beginning around language, other people would be able to talk much more, much more educated way about this question, but it is a really important one.
Look, thank you. I appreciate, as you say, there are no easy answers, but I do want to thank you. Well, thank you again for your thoughts. But also, one point you did make at the outset too, I think, in terms of Hindi, was you did make the point. I think it's really poignant. Like, one is that it's a real life-changing experience, like having access to another language. It just it can especially if you're learning it anew, I think as a sort of an adult, that's as opposed to sort of people that have that knowledge as a by virtue of their heritage. I think that's also a very powerful thing, and a message we probably should be trying to underline and underscore to people, sort of as a great reason to learn Asian studies.
Yeah, and
Um,
languages are important for everybody's education. I think, I mean, they know that very well in Europe. I mean, they all, learn two or three
mm,
languages, and our region is Asia and Oceania. So, they're the languages that we should learn. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Tanya. Again, appreciate your time and your willingness to take part in our project.